The death. Finally, at 6 o'clock in the evening of the 5th of May, a minute and a half after the cannon shot at Tetu, the emperor died. The breaths, which had at first been at regular intervals, became progressively farther and farther apart, and the last, slower than those which preceded it, was only the breathing out of a long sigh. Alas, there was left of the emperor nothing but the mortal remains. At this supreme moment, all eyes were filled with tears. What a sad and sublime spectacle was the death of a great man, and of a man of Napoleon's stature. If his enemies had been present, their eyes too would have been moist, and they would have wept over his lifeless body. As soon as those present had recovered a little from their painful emotion, the Grand Marshal was the first to rise from his chair and kiss the emperor's hand, and all, without exception, followed his example, and sobs burst forth and tears flowed more freely. During his last days, the emperor had always remained in the same position, lying on his back with his head straight on the pillow, his right arm stretched out on the bed, and the left generally like the right, with this difference that he sometimes placed his hand on his breast, and that this hand sometimes held the cord which was attached to. The knobs on the two posts of the headboard of the bed. His handkerchief was on this cord. His thighs were separated and his heels together. The emperor died without the slightest perceptible convulsion and without the least stiffening. He went out as the light of a lamp goes out. Immediately after kissing the emperor's hand, the Grand Marshal, Monsieur de Monteslan, Marchand, and the Abbé Vignali went into the reception room, where Marchand handed Monsieur de Monteslan the package containing the will and codicils. When the seals had been recognized to be intact, the Abbé Vignali returned to the salon alone, and the other three proceeded to open the different envelopes. Messieurs de Monteslan, Bertrand, and Marchand found themselves named as testamentary executors. Monsieur de Monteslan was named first. By a particular codicil, the emperor gave to each of his testamentary executors 50,000 francs from the money which he had at Longwood, and directed that to each of his servants should be given a sum larger or smaller in accordance with their wages and the length of the service to provide for their return to Europe. By another codicil, he left to his executors his money, his jewelry, his silverware, porcelain, furniture, books, arms, and everything which belonged to him at St. Helena. By the same act, he desired that his ashes might rest on the banks of the Seine, among the French people, whom he loved so much. The emperor had given instructions for his funeral and had designated the spot in which he wished to be buried if the British government would not allow his body to be carried to Europe. As soon as the emperor had ceased to live, Monsieur Antomarchi had closed his eyes, and soon after had placed a handkerchief under his chin, tied above his head to close his mouth, which was a little open. A slight contraction which had appeared in the upper lip remained, allowing 2 or 3 of the front teeth to be seen. The emperor's head had something of the beauty of the antique metals, and his hands, which were somewhat thin, were of the most perfect model. They resembled the beautiful hands of a woman. As soon as the testamentary executors had examined the will and codicils, they returned to the salon. The chandelier was lighted. All the French ranged themselves to right and left of the bed, and Messieurs Short and Nichols, accompanied by the orderly officer, Captain Crocat, who had taken the place of Captain Nichols some weeks before, entered to verify the death. They examined and felt the emperor's body, after which they retired. To all this movement, calm succeeded, the calm of death. 2 or 3 servants remained to watch. All the others went home. It was the first night that we were going to pass without the emperor. Marchand and I were tired and had entire liberty to go and rest, yet in spite of that, sleep had not the power to take hold of us. We were both buried in the sadness and deepest reflections. This liberty which we were going to have would only be a heavy burden for us poor servants. The conditions of easy servitude in which we had lived and to which we were accustomed would have been better. Until now we had had no concern for our future. Someone had thought for us, and for us that someone, the emperor, was and ought to be everything. When he was alive, fortunate or unfortunate, we had a support, a stay. Now that he was dead, we were left unprotected and abandoned to ourselves. After him, there was no one to whom we could attach ourselves. In losing him, we lost everything in the world which was dearest to us. During the evening, Marchand, my wife, and I were alone in the salon, seated on the sofa which was near the door of the dining room. My wife had her daughter in her arms. We were talking in a low voice about the emperor, whose body lay a few steps from us. I do not know what caused it, but Marchand took my child, went to the bed, and made her place her lips on the emperor's hand, which was scarcely cold.